There's a couple things I want to talk about. First and foremost, the big topic, quote unquote, that I wanted to talk about this week is, so I have recently been thinking about, and this video, by the way, this video has kind of evolved from its original iteration that I had in my mind, right? So originally, I was planning this video to be about the scarcity of butches in terms of like a romantic sense. And I do think that's going to come up in this iteration, but it has sort of changed because with everything going on, I kind of started to think about there's some other more problematic readings we can do when we talk about the scarcity of butches and studs and like masculine sapphics or masculine lesbians. So I wanted to talk about that as well, because I think it's all a myth, and it's all kind of like semi-tangentially related, but also like part of an overarching conversation, right? Which is the idea that there are less butches and studs now than there's ever been. Obviously, that is just factually incorrect. There's, like I said, there's a lot of different readings you can do for this conversation. The transphobic reading of there are less butches and studs now than there's ever been is they're all transitioning and therefore no longer identifying as butches and studs. And to that, I can clearly say, I mean, first of all, just factually inaccurate. I don't think there's any more that are, realizing their transness than ever before. I don't believe that there are less butches and studs now because all of them are transitioning. I think that is just transphobic rhetoric. I think it's just ridiculous rhetoric too. And I think it ignores the fact that that's a good thing for them. I think that's really kind of messed up, actually, to have that be your mentality of like, wow, this really sucks for me. Like that's wild to me as like a way of looking at things of like, well, wow, this really affects me so negatively. Like, really, girl? It's not about you, actually. That's number one. But anyway, I think it's also true, though, that what that conversation ignores by saying, oh, all the butches and studs are transitioning now, so there's so fewer of them. You're ignoring the butches and studs that are being created by trans women, because there are inevitably going to be trans women who identify as butch, who identify as a stud if they're a trans woman of color. And that's an amazing thing. So no, I don't agree with the statement that there are less than ever. And I also feel like there are people who realize every day that they're a butch. I think about this. Not everyone knew from an early age. I was almost 30 when I realized I was a femme and a lesbian. That is a long, long ass time. That's almost 15 years of my dating life that I spent thinking I was interested in men. So you can imagine that there are plenty more people like me who may in fact be butches or studs or masculine of center, whatever you want to say, who don't realize it yet because, I don't know, maybe they're trying to date men, or maybe there's so many different factors. This idea that, oh, there's less of them now than there's ever been. No, we have more opportunity now than we have ever had to see someone and recognize in ourselves, oh my God, that's me. I've had people just in my videos, just since I started making these videos, who have said, hi, I'm new to the community. I realized I was butch and this video made me feel so seen and, understood. And that's just since I started making these kinds of videos in the last year and a half. So of course there are not less now than there have ever been, because people are always recognizing themselves. And sometimes I imagine it's gotta be so much harder to find yourself as a butch because there is so little representation. I mean, there's more now than there's ever been, but there is not a lot overall. And I imagine that's gotta be so hard to see yourself and picture yourself when the representation just is not there. It's not there. It's not available. How do you recognize yourself when you don't see anyone who looks like you? And God, that's just butches. I mean, studs, that representation isn't there either. I'm trying to think of modern television, maybe Orange is the New Black. I don't, there's that representation just isn't there. That representation just unfortunately does not exist to that degree. And so it's like, how do you find yourself? How do you explore that part of your identity when the representation just is not really there? I'm always hoping to change that, and I'm always hoping that my work, my writing, my videos will change that, because I think in a lot of ways the best representation that exists is YouTube and TikTok and Instagram. I know all of us have a lot of issues with TikTok, and there's a lot of like questionable content on TikTok. But I will say, for me, and I've talked about this before, I'm pretty sure, TikTok is kind of how I realized I was a femme. TikTok butches were how I realized I was a femme. It is one of those things where there's good and bad points to it. That's the internet. There's good and bad points to all of the internet. As much as I would like to say, there's more good than bad, I would like to believe that, but like generally speaking, there's good and bad points to all of the internet, and TikTok is no exception. But it is a tool for visibility. It is a tool where people who are queer, who are femme, who are this, who are that, can see themselves and see like, oh, this is what I'm attracted to. It's not that I didn't know butches existed. That's a whole other video of like, why did this take me so long? I actually did want to do a video that's like signs I should have realized sooner, because I do think A, that's hilarious. B, it's so accurate, because there were so many signs that I'm like, should have realized that sooner. But, it is one of those things where I would say that visibility matters. That visibility in our community matters. What little there is to be had, it does matter, and it is important. And so, I'm not necessarily on the train of like, we have to get rid of TikTok. I think people need to have better conversations about media literacy. I think we need to have better conversations about like things that are true and things that are untrue, and like spreading false information, because it's not as if false information is unique to TikTok. It's not as if it's unique to, it's pretty popular on the internet, yes, but it's not unique to the internet, I wouldn't say either. I would argue that there are more butches and studs now than ever, and there are more people realizing that that is how they see themselves and who they are every day, because there are more people every day who have the opportunity to see themselves. There is a very unfortunate transphobic reading that goes into a lot of the conversation of, oh, there's less butches and studs now. Let's be honest, transphobes are not talking about studs. The people who are transphobic, by the way, don't really care about butches. It's more of a trying to use them to make a point. It just is a way to further demonize trans people, essentially. That's really what it is. They can pretend that they care about butches and studs. They never have. It's all a smokescreen is what it is. And it's unfortunate some people don't recognize it for what it is. I know a lot of people do, but I feel like there are quite a few people who don't recognize it for what it is. There's quite a few people who don't recognize, like, this is a smokescreen. You are using this as a way to demonize a group of people and hide behind a different group of people who actually have more in common together than they do with you. But if they realize that and recognize that, that would put you out of existence. Because that is the reality of the situation. Trans women and I've made a whole video to this effect, trans women and butches and studs have way more in common than they ever will with TERFs. That's just the reality of the situation. But TERFs don't want you to know that, because it doesn't fit with their worldview. Because, being a trans woman is different from being a cis woman. Well, yeah, it's different for a lot of women. Like, please, give me a break. It's different for straight women, too. That doesn't mean we don't exist. There are so many other conversations that need to be had, too. But I just feel like when people say, oh, there's somehow less butches and studs now than there's ever been, it's just like, I encourage you to ask yourself why you feel that way. And again, there's other ways to look at this. The original way I was going to posit this video was just like in a romantic sense, because there's a lot of butches and studs that are already in relationships and are already happily married, and that's amazing. But it is frustrating when you're a single gal like me who's like, oh shit, there goes another one. And so that was like, at a point, that was the original course that this video was going to take. And then it occurred to me that there was kind of more to this story, and it was becoming a thing that I was seeing, where I was seeing this kind of conversation about like there's less butches and studs because they're all transition. It's just, unfortunately, I feel like the situation that we are in currently politically has allowed TERFs to feel more emboldened. It's allowed transphobic people to feel more emboldened, because ultimately they think more people agree with them than actually do. And that, I think, has become probably one of the more unfortunate aspects of Pride this year, is like transphobia, I think, has really hit a fever pitch. There's been so many laws that kind of, have been really hurting trans people. And so I feel like transphobes have felt very emboldened more than ever the last year. And so these conversations keep coming back up. Just from a reality standpoint, anybody who has ever felt like, oh God, there's so many fewer butches and studs now, I just want you to know, whether you're a single gal like me and you feel like there's a scarcity of them because they're all taken, or whatever the reason, it's just not accurate. It's not mathematically accurate. It's not. And again, I mean, there's no hard and fast studies. There's no hard and fast, obviously we can't really take a roll call of every butch or stud in the world, or masculine, lesbian. We can't really take a roll call of that. I don't know if there's a way to ever have exact numbers, but I would argue, because one of the things too is it does seem often there are more femmes in the community than butches. And to that I would argue, I know a butch who was previously femme and realized and embraced their butchness in the last year and a half, 2 years. I've known femmes who had previously, butch experiences. I just feel like, and I actually did have a plan to do a whole video on kind of the dichotomy of butch and femme, and how as much as I think some people do tend, even in our own community, do tend to view us as opposite sides, I would actually say we do have more in common, and we're more two sides of the same coin. So for me, I kind of view it as, there is such a spectrum, and there are so many times where there are definitely femmes who are more masculine, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think there's so many different ways to view being femme or being butch. And so, this idea that there's not as many butches as there could be or should be, I just think that's just not accurate. I think you have to look at it as it takes time. Not everyone knows this about themselves from birth. Not everyone knows who they are from a young age. You would think nowadays it's easier, because ultimately there is more visibility than there's ever been. In some ways it's probably easier, but in other ways I think it's still hard, because there is more visibility, but not a ton of visibility. There's just so many different factors. So I just encourage you to kind of view it as and obviously this is a conversation not for people who are transphobic, because I don't think they're going to be watching this video anyway. Maybe hate watching, and that's fine by me. Views are views, baby. You want to hate watch? You go right ahead. I used to block people so they couldn't leave comments when they were transphobic, but actually I'm gonna stop doing that now, because views are views and subscribers are subscribers. And if you want to hate me, that is your business. I don't have any control of that. That's not my problem. I think you're incorrect, but that's not my problem. You're allowed to be wrong. We're living in a time where it's very much okay. Even though it's hard right now, it's very much okay. We're not living... there are still, people in the community who try to tell butches and studs and femmes that, we're harming the community because, it's reductive and it's, too much straight culture. That is almost hilarious. It's not hilarious, though, because it's actually stupid. How is this still an argument? How are people still saying that a relationship that consists of two women, regardless of if one of them is more masculine or one of them is more feminine, is somehow less gay than any other two women? No, that is not how that works. It's just so, to me, it's so ridiculous and silly, and not in a cute way. It's just, it's lesbophobic, it's butchphobic, it's femphobic, but it's also just pathetic to say, oh, well, you're not as lesbian if you're in a relationship with someone's masc. Or, people who want to be well, why don't you just date a man? No one's ever asked me that, thankfully, But if they did, I would have to be like, yeah, I've already done that. Didn't work out for me. Don't have an interest in doing it again. Thanks. Like, not even just that it didn't work out for me. It's just like, that wasn't who I was attracted to. Like, masculinity does not equal man. They're not related. So my final thoughts on this subject are, I really feel like I've said everything that I could possibly say. Obviously, I do firmly believe that it's just transphobia to say that there are less butches now than there have ever been because they're all transitioning. But it's also just factually inaccurate. I don't think that the trans community amounts for any more than, the 1 or 2% that it's always meant, but it's also factually inaccurate just for the sheer fact of there are more people who are realizing they're butch every single day. There are more people who are, trans women who are transitioning and realizing they're butch. There are just more people in general who are realizing themselves every day and realizing what it is they want every day. And that's ultimately a good thing. Like, if you realize something about yourself, obviously, as someone who has come out multiple times, most people are probably not going to come out as many times as I have, and that's great. But for anyone who does, I want you to see that you can realize things about yourself and you can make a change and say, okay, I was wrong, or this just doesn't represent me anymore. Whatever the case may be, you don't have to say anything. Just be yourself, live your life, enjoy yourself. Nobody gets to tell you how to be you. Nobody gets to tell you how to live your best life or how to live your life. As long as you're not hurting anyone, which, for the record, realizing that you are trans or not trans or lesbian or not lesbian or bi or gay or whatever, none of those things hurt anyone. It doesn't hurt anyone for you to realize, hey, this thing I thought about myself, it doesn't apply anymore. You don't have to say it to anyone because it's no one's business ultimately. But if you want to come out like I have, 4 different times, I don't think that's a bad thing. Live your life the way you see fit. If something changes, if you realize something that, doesn't work, that maybe did work in the past, that's not a bad thing. And I don't feel like you should feel guilty or bad for that. I realize that probably wasn't the expected end sentence to the conversation of like, there are actually more butches and studs than we recognize. But my point in saying that is just to say, like, if you are someone who, maybe thought you were straight, or maybe you were someone who identified more femme, or just didn't even think about it and you're realizing that you're butch, embrace that if you want to. And embracing it for yourself doesn't mean you have to say it publicly, doesn't mean you have to tell everyone. Pride, it's important to be visible, it's important to be out if you can and if you're comfortable being out. I don't think it should be a requirement for people. I think there is sometimes too much of an emphasis put on that. Again, this is like a whole other video, I feel like. But I just wanted to say that because I think it's very important. Wow. I think it's very, very important, and I just don't think it gets said enough. So for the record, it is completely a myth busted. There are more butches and studs and more masc people out there. Like, do not let anyone tell you that there are less now than there's ever been. Come on now. This community has existed since the 1950s. We're not going anywhere. There are not less butches now. There are not less femmes now. There are not more femmes and butches. Like, let's not do this thing. Let's not try and tear each other down. No, don't do that. Do not let the transphobes win. It's not true. It's not accurate. And that's all I got to say about that. So if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up, comment down below, tell me your experience realizing that you were butch or femme. Like, did it take you a long time? Did you know from, birth or a very young age? I'd love to hear that because I always feel like it's so interesting to hear other people's stories about this. And it's so interesting to hear like how people realized it, when they realized it. So I would love to hear that. And yeah, of course, subscribe if you like content like this, if you like to see a little femme lesbian put on her makeup and look cute and fabulous and talk about gay things, because that is what I do here. And of course, if you want to see more gay shit, you can follow me over on Patreon at patreon.com/narcissistiville, and you can watch exclusive videos that are special and different. Until next time, stay devilish.